surface spray on the roads. And then through the course of the night, most of the rain will clear its way into the North Sea, leaving largely clear skies across parts of England and Wales, but further showers moving in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So as we do start Monday, could just see some overnight rain just lingering across the southeast, but generally for a lot of England and Wales, actually it's going to be quite a pleasant day, plenty of sunshine, a few showers around, but for Scotland and Northern Ireland, really a day of sunshine and blustery showers, with some of these showers potentially quite heavy and thundery. For most of us, temperatures generally around where they should be for the time of year, but in the south, in the sunshine, feeling quite warm.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey show on this Sunday morning. Thank you for your company. It's been a big weekend in Westminster and a climate climb down from the Prime Minister. So, of course, we've got another great show with lots of great guests for you coming up over the next 90 minutes. I'm going to be quizzing Tory MP Craig Mackinlay, who leads the Net Zero Scrutiny Committee of MPs, on the Prime Minister's new eco-measures, or at least watered-down eco-measures. Does he think that Rishi Sunak has gone far enough in his U-turn? I'm also going to be speaking to the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, after a number of people were arrested this week accused of spying for Russia. Does the UK have an espionage problem? The former Labour MP Luciana Berger also joins me. She was forced out of the party because of anti-Semitism. She'll tell me what she thinks of reports that Jeremy Corbyn is plotting to run for Mayor of London. And I'll be hearing from the Liberal Democrats' Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain, from their conference in Bournemouth. And the outspoken Tory backbencher Daniel Kawczynski joins me in the studio to dissect another busy week in politics. What does he make of the plans to cut inheritance tax? Now, before we get through all that, let's go through the front pages. Let's start. There's one story that's dominating the papers this morning, as you can imagine. HS2. Sunday Telegraph goes with axe looms over HS2, over 8 billion cost shock. The bill has gone up by another 8 billion. Can you believe it? The Sunday Times goes with Sunak revives plan to slash inheritance tax. This has been waiting in the wings, hasn't it? And it seems to be a kind of pseudo-confirmation that that's the direction of travel for the Prime Minister, clearly with a key eye on the next general election. The Observer goes with Sunak pushes to axe HS2 link ahead of Tory conference. I'm going to be discussing that in just a minute because they're axing the link to Manchester and the conference is in Manchester. The Mail on Sunday goes with Rishi will not axe triple lock on pensions, and there's an interesting commentary inside suggesting that if he did axe it, it would be political suicide. The Sunday Express, PM takes fight to Starmer. And then the Sun on Sunday goes with Strictly Haunted, a story about potentially the Strictly studio that my colleague Angela Rippon is currently dancing in, being haunted by ghosts, would you believe? And then the Sunday Mirror's got an interview with Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson's former nanny, saying Carrie sacked me for boozing with Boris. Quite an interesting story about how she was sacked after she had a glass of rosé with the former Prime Minister. Now let's bring in David Maddox, the Express's online political editor, former colleague of mine at Express Towers. David, lovely to see you this morning. Let's go with your Sunday Express front page because it kind of sums it all up. This idea that I felt that when Rishi Sunak performed this climate climb down last week, he was sounding the gun on the next general election. Is that your feeling? Where are we going, do you think?
I think that that was everything that it was about, actually. And I'm not sure it was a climb down on his part. I think he was always a bit more sceptical than people gave him credit for. It was very much a Boris Johnson policy that he was climbing down.
Influenced maybe by his wife and their friend, Lord Goldsmith.
But when he did that, I saw some of the Conservative WhatsApp groups. The chat was May election. We're in this time. I think the Sun on Sunday.
Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be autumn. What is the argument in favour of a May election then, David?
So, by doing the net zero thing he did, he's picking the fight for the election. You maximise that in the next 6 months, essentially. But the problem he has with waiting to the autumn is that the small boats will start coming over in large numbers again. He will lose a lot of the credit he's had on the net zero side. Of course, we've now got the inheritance tax.
Yeah, do you think they'll do this then? So the Sunday Times saying that they've revived this idea. It doesn't actually affect that many people, and Labour could attack it as a policy to make the rich more money.
This is about getting the Conservative base back.
Yeah.
If you look at the breakdowns of opinion polls, it's Conservative supporters who've left the party, who are not voting, who are sitting on their hands. This is a red meat for them to say, come back to us, come and vote for us again.
And then, of course, there's also been talk about this situation with regard to HS2. Let's move on to that now. I mean, all of the signs are pointing to at least part of this project not going ahead in the north, which is problematic from a political perspective because they talk about levelling up. He's going to Manchester for the Tory party conference next weekend. This show will be there, by the way. We're going to be reporting live from Manchester. And yet, at the same time, northern voters will be wondering why on earth they want to support a party that seems to have cast them adrift from a rail perspective.
Well, I mean, the real scandal, I think, came a couple of years back when they cancelled Northern Powerhouse Rail, which was much more necessary. I mean, what's the point of HS2?
I've no idea.
If it's not going to Euston, it's not going to Manchester. I remember the days when we were talking about it going to Edinburgh and Glasgow, you know.
Yes.
It's apparently, according to the Mail, going to be slower now to Manchester.
They've got this fascinating graphic in the Mail talking about how, because now it's not coming into Euston, but it's ending at Old Oak Common, which is near Acton in West London, because you have to get to Acton to get on the high-speed rail, it's actually just quicker to go on a slower line from London to Birmingham. Yeah. Also, I never really understood what was the priority of London to Birmingham? There were already good links there. What about Manchester to Leeds? What about Manchester to Newcastle? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, Dave.
None of it makes any sense. It never did make any sense. And, you know, the sadness about this is that lives have been ruined.
Yeah.
People have been kicked out of their houses. You know, ancient woodlands have been destroyed.
But if they axe part of it now, or axe, I mean, can they axe it completely when the tunnels have already been drilled? I mean, it seems to me that they're not going to win either way, because if they axe it, they look weak, and everyone's going to be asking, you've spent 100 billion of taxpayers' cash on this, and you're now axing it. And if they keep on going with it, it's still a white elephant, because people are working remotely. It's slower than conventional lines, and it doesn't cover the north.
It is a black hole where money was always going to disappear down, and maybe they're right now to pull the plug on it. I mean, I think the strikes, frankly, have a part to play in this. The fact that the strikes have stopped people going back to rail after the pandemic, and you know, what's the point of investing?
Wouldn't Labour be in a better position if they supported axing HS2? I mean, I appreciate they can't do that because of their union paymasters who are representing people who are going to work on these projects for years to come. But there isn't the clear blue water that Rishi Sunak wants on this issue. I noticed that Starmer hasn't really said anything about the net zero. I'm getting the impression the government wants a fight. It wants to take the fight to Labour. People are saying, oh, they're indistinguishable. We don't know the difference between Starmer and Sunak. So he's saying all of these quite right-wing things, throwing the red meat, but yet Starmer's not taking the bait on any of this, is he?
Well, Starmer's being advised by Lord Mandelson.
Right.
And via Tony Blair
the
as well.
former master of the dark arts.
Exactly. And the whole strategy is to say as little as possible, to stay under the radar as possible, because every time he does actually come out with a policy, as he did with the migration the other week, it falls apart at the first touch. And I mean, we kind of see Labour unmasked.
So it's the silent assassin approach continues,
exactly.
Dave. Yellow fever. We've got the Liberal Democrats, their conferences in Bournemouth. We've got Ed Davey in The Observer saying, I'll take the fight to the Tories. Will he?
Do you know, I think the polls are underestimating the impact of the Lib Dem vote.
Really?
We keep on seeing them around 8 to 10%. We say, oh, the Lib Dems are finished. They're nothing like, you know, when Nick Clegg got to being Deputy Prime Minister and things. No, that's true to a certain extent, but there are swathes of Conservative seats. Because of the way Lib Dem votes split around the country, it's not even.
Yes.
It's very strong in certain areas. So the South West, Hampshire, Surrey...
The so-called blue wall, basically, which Davey's saying he'll smash through.
Yeah.
Although I'm going to ask Wendy Chamberlain this later. She's the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip. This confusion over where they are on the EU got Layla Moran, their own foreign affairs spokeswoman, saying we will rejoin, and Davey saying no, we won't. You know, where do you stand?
If you look at the wording of their policy, it is rejoin without admitting that they would rejoin.
Because I think there are some Conservatives who obviously back Brexit that might be disaffected with Rishi Sunak, but they're not going to be wanting to support a party that wants to take us back into Brussels, right? In general, it seems that voters are completely disillusioned with politics and politicians. Interesting polling in The Telegraph, where effectively a third of voters say that politicians are the worst ever, and also that they would like to see a new party or political figure to seize on the disillusion. Basically, we're saying that they're trumping for a Donald-like figure. Well, they had that with Boris Johnson, and it all went wrong.
Yes, they did, but there are other people out there. There are other options out there.
Who are you thinking about?
Well, you know,
somebody that might be close to this channel.
Maybe a Mr Farage and...
I know, but we keep on grilling Nige on this, and he's like, oh, well, I don't know if I'm going to step back into the fray.
I think the issue there is, I don't think Reform UK is the right platform.
Yeah.
If there was a new Conservative party on the right, and it would need to be a new Conservative party, then I think that
Led
would
by
pose,
whom, though?
Well, somebody like Nigel, maybe somebody like Priti Patel, somebody on the right of Conservatives, then there would be a chance.
I mean, Sunak clearly recognises this because he has this week...
This comes back down to a reason for the May election.
Is he more right-wing than he makes out? I say that because we've had Lord Ashcroft's biography in the week come out basically saying he's a Thatcherite at heart. He's just been stymied by Boris Johnson's excessive public spending and some of these green levies that he never supported. He is, quotes, not a hair shirt green, he said.
Yeah, well, I'm actually quoted in that book.
Are you, David?
Yeah, on the Brexit issue, because he was always said that he's not a real Brexiteer. And the first time I met him was on the day he told David Cameron to get stuffed because he was going to support Leave. And I knew Rishi quite well when he was a backbencher, and he always struck me as being a Thatcherite and a Brexiteer.
Yeah.
And maybe...
He keeps it well disguised at times,
he does,
doesn't he?
Yeah, I think it's been disappointing to a certain degree.
Maybe we're going to see a bit more after the net zero climb down of him unleashing his inner Maggie. Just a final word on this interview with Jenny Harries in The Telegraph, which incensed us both slightly in the green room. We'll behave more like Sweden when the next pandemic hits, says Jenny Harries, who was basically to Chris Whitty's sort of number two.
Yes.
Sorry? Hang on a minute. Weren't newspapers like yours and mine and commentators like you and me saying throughout the entire escapade that we should be more like Sweden and getting shot down by people for apparently wanting OAPs to be killed in their droves? Now she says this.
I trawled through that article looking for an apology. I didn't see one. I think they managed to drag out the admission that they would follow the more liberal approach that Sweden took. I mean, I remember being in the Zoom meetings with you.
I know, little Zoom meetings with Carl Hennigan and Robert Dingwall and people saying, hang on, has anyone considered the effect on children's mental health of closing down schools? We reported this stuff. We got absolutely trashed on Twitter. Turns out we might have been right, folks. Who'd have thought it? Anyway, David, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Lovely, lovely to see you. Now, as I think you know, because she was on Breakfast, Catherine Forster is in Dover with the People's Panel. She's got a great lineup of panellists to get stuck into our guests this morning. Catherine, what do your panellists want to ask the people appearing on the show today?
Yes, good morning, Camilla. Excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. From Dover, we're at the Tea Cafe. It's a lovely sunny day. I'm in the shade, obviously. Let's meet our panel now. So let's talk, first of all, to the owner. Good morning, Kelly. Thank you very much for hosting us today on the People's Panel. It's absolutely rammed in here. How's business and what's your secret?
Business is brilliant. We've not had bad experience with business. We've kept it all through the lockdown. It's doing really well. Our price is low and business is booming.
That's really great to hear. Lots of people enjoying full English breakfast. I might be tempted a little bit later. Right, let's go and talk to our panel now. Thank you all very much for coming out this morning. Lorraine, I'm going to talk to you first. You are... You worked as a magistrate. You worked for the Border Force for 27 years. Obviously, illegal immigration, people coming across the Channel, a huge issue around the country, but you're really bearing the brunt of it in Dover. Tell us what you think about the government's policy. Rishi Sunak said he's going to stop the boats. Is he? And what's the effect locally?
I don't believe a word that comes from the government. We lent our votes to the Conservatives because we thought Brexit was actually going to happen. We've never been given the Brexit that we wanted. There are illegal immigrants coming up on the local beaches that are disappearing into the wider countryside. A lady last year at Aycliffe had one break into her house and frightened her during the day, came into her kitchen. They are everywhere. We don't know where they are. The government lost control a long time ago. People locally have to wait 6 to 8 months to get a dentist appointment, but they hold slots open every day at my dentist for illegals to be brought in by Border Force to be seen by a dentist just in case they need it. They jump the queue in the hospitals, Border Force walks straight into the front of the queue with them, and nobody locally can actually get to see anybody. And if we thought that our country defence was poor before, we've now got Grant Shapps in charge. We are in a really sorry state if that bloke is in charge of our defence.
not a fan of Grant Shapps. Feelings running very high in Dover about this issue, understandably. Let's talk now to you, Steve. Steve, you were a deputy prison governor. We'll talk a bit about Wandsworth Jail later. But we were talking a bit earlier about climate change and the net zero policies. Give us your thoughts, and I think also you've got a question for Labour, haven't you?
Yes. Firstly, I'm not sold on the climate issue. I don't think the science is settled as we're being told it is. The country is being crippled with a cost of living crisis which has been exacerbated by the net zero agenda. I'd like to know what Labour would do differently if to what the Conservatives are doing, because as far as I can see, there is not a fag paper's difference between the two parties.
Well, Rishi Sunak last week sort of set the cat among the pigeons, didn't he, by softening a lot of these net zero targets, lengthening the dates before you have to buy electric cars, etc. But yes, obviously the cost of living is high on everybody's minds, and people are worried about that, and green policies. Of course, Labour would say that green agenda, that there's lots of jobs, that's the future. But let's talk now to you, Ian. You are a dog walker and trainer. You've worked for animal charities all over the world. We're going to talk a tiny bit about XL bullies, but also you've got a question about immigration as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I just need to know what Labour are doing at the moment. They seem to be changing their mind every 5 minutes. Are we going to sort of take thousands in from the EU and then give a handful back, or nobody knows what they're doing?
They're going to have to be rather clearer, aren't they, in the run-up to the next election about what they actually do intend to do. I'm being told to wrap, but very, very quickly. XL bullies, is the problem the dogs or the owners?
The owners. It's another dog that's in a long list of like pit bulls and everything. Just in a long list of dogs that have been demonised, really.
OK, so a ban coming. Of course, the dogs won't be culled, but they will have to be muzzled going forwards. So that's it for now, Camilla. We'll look forward to seeing what the politicians have to say, and we'll come back to you a bit later. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Catherine. Sorry, we've got such a packed show. We're trying to cram everything in, so we're going to come back to Dover in a little while. By the way, don't forget, if you want to apply for the People's Panel next week, it's gbnews.com/panel. Now, I'm delighted to be in the studio with backbencher extraordinaire Daniel Kawczynski. He's the Tory MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham. Daniel, lovely to see you this morning. You ready for a May election?
Well, we will be ready for whenever the election is called.
I know, but what do you reckon? May rather than the autumn next year?
Well, whether it's May or October, it's a difference of a few months, isn't it?
I know, but when you've got a team ready to try and assemble an election campaign and you've got less time, we'll come out of Christmas and the next thing we know, everyone's going to be leafleting. That puts pressure on MPs like you, doesn't it?
Well, we were out leafleting and canvassing in Shrewsbury yesterday. We knocked on nearly 300 doors in 2.5 hours. So we're already in election mode, and that will be the case for the next 12 months.
Are you worried about the Lib Dems in Shrewsbury? Because we've got Ed Davey today saying that he's intending on smashing through the blue wall. Your voters might not necessarily want to switch to Labour, but they might think that the Lib Dems are a bit of a halfway house?
Well, we never discount the threat from the Lib Dems in any constituency, but I think the Labour Party is the main challenge.
And what about this net zero climb down? Presumably you were in support of this in the week.
Very much so, and so are many Tory party activists.
So are you changing your mind about Rishi Sunak? Because I remember our last conversation, you were a bit ambivalent about him and his Conservative credentials. You perhaps didn't think he was right-wing enough, and now we've just heard from David Maddox talking about him throwing red meat to Tories like you, so you must be delighted.
Well, I didn't vote for him originally, but what I have seen over the last 12 months is that he has brought back discipline into the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and now he is giving us the sort of policies that we can sell on the doorstep, particularly over the changes over net zero.
Yeah.
The United Kingdom produces less than 1% of global CO2 emissions,
Yes.
and we have reduced those at a faster rate than most of our G20 competitors. So he understands, unlike Sir Keir, that yes, we are committed to reducing CO2 emissions, but we can't move at a pace which puts our industry and households at a disadvantage to our European competitors. That's very, very important.
OK,
It
so you
shows
might be
that he
able to sell
understands.
that on the doorstep, although obviously some polling companies suggest that the public are behind the net zero ambition, if not having to pay for it through the nose to achieve it. How well does the idea of scrapping HS2 go down on the doorstep?
Well, one of the reasons I supported HS2 is the then...
I didn't know you supported... Are you regretting that support,
Well,
Daniel?
I've got to be honest with you. I voted for it because
Yes.
we were told by Patrick McLaughlin,
Yes.
the then Secretary of State for Transport, that this was also an issue of capacity. We have been campaigning for a direct train service from London to Shrewsbury, and we weren't allowed to have it for a long time because they said that the network is at full capacity. We've secured a direct train service between London and Shrewsbury, but we were told that HS2, it's not just about you know, faster trains to Birmingham or Manchester. We were also told about capacity.
So do you feel you were lied to? Because it seems ridiculous to have been sold HS2 on the basis of more capacity from London to Birmingham, and now we seem to be talking about more capacity from Old Oak Common to Birmingham and no more capacity at all between Birmingham and Manchester.
Well, when you make these monumental changes, like the Victorians did, on building major infrastructure projects, which could potentially have major benefits, not just for yourselves, but for future generations, of course they're controversial. Of course they're costly. Of course there are people who think that we can't afford it. But
Well, we can't really, can we? It's gone from 35 billion to 100 billion.
Well, this
Don't
is-
you regret the cost? Or do you regret voting for it?
I do know that this is a highly polarised issue, and I know that there are many constituents who feel that we ought to scrap it.
Do you wish that you hadn't voted for it?
No, I'm not going to say that. I'm waiting to hear how the government will respond to these growing costs. But the issue of capacity is a genuine one. It wasn't raised in your previous interview with my friend David Maddox, but it is still an important issue to be debated.
But the demand on the railways has gone down because more people are working remotely since COVID.
And this is one of the things which I recognise, and I agree with David in the sense that, next Saturday, yet another train strike. And I think the trade unions have played a big part in disincentivising people from using the train.
We can blame the unions for a lot. And, I'm the first to call out strikes that affect all of our travel plans, not least when we're trying to commute into work and earn an honest day's crust. However, we can't blame the unions for a bill on HS2 skyrocketing from 35 billion to over 100 billion and lunatic decision-making, like, for instance, axing the leg from Old Oak Common to London and now not investing in the north. I mean, you're in a more northern constituency than a lot of people who might be making this decision-making down in London. The north feels left behind from a rail perspective. You've got to sympathise with that. I get that you've got your rail link, but we've still not got a clear link from Manchester to Leeds in 2023.
Oh, absolutely. And you are highlighting the alternative perspectives and debates and arguments of this highly polarising issue. And I understand the frustration that the residents, voters have over the spiralling costs of this project. It's something that the government will have to address over the coming weeks and months to explain what their strategy is. But I don't apologise for voting for it because I do know that the capacity issue for us was essential in getting a direct link for us from Shrewsbury to London.
Let's just drill into your experience on Polish matters. The collapse of this grain deal between Poland and Ukraine, and now Poland had been a key ally of President Zelensky's, now sort of talking about withdrawing weaponry. What's your analysis of that, Daniel?
Well, no two European countries have done more for Ukraine than Britain and Poland. And these two critical NATO partners have joined forces to help Kiev at a time of extraordinary manipulation and aggression from Moscow. What I really regret is that obviously the Ukrainians can't export their grain through the Black Sea because the Russians are preventing that from happening. There was an agreement with the European Union that Ukraine could transit through European Union countries to export their grain to third parties. That agreement came to an end on September the 15th, and the European Union has not extended it. And so now Ukraine is dumping its
Daniel,
grain.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to leave it there because unfortunately we're running out of time.
All right.
But you support Poland's decision-making in this?
Well, I think Poland is a very strong supporter of Ukraine, yes.
All right. We've got weather coming next, and I'll be back very soon. Don't go anywhere.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning. Welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, today, very different day to yesterday. Spells of heavy rain, especially across the northern half of the UK. Best of any brightness, really, across the south. So as we start the day, got this area of rain across parts of Wales and the Midlands. This will gradually spread its way northwards as we go through the course of the morning, turning quite heavy at times, and then this rain will then transfer into Northern Ireland and Scotland through the afternoon. A thoroughly wet afternoon to come here. But further south, actually, it starts to turn a bit drier and brighter. Increasing amounts of sunshine, especially down towards the southeast. Could see highs reaching 21 degrees here. Elsewhere, the temperature's tempered somewhat by the strength of the wind and also the rain. Into the evening, the rain potentially turning heavier still across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So watch out if you are travelling. There could be quite a lot of surface spray on the roads. And then through the course of the night, most of the rain will clear its way into the North Sea, leaving largely clear skies across parts of England and Wales, but further showers moving in across parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So as we do start Monday, could just see some overnight rain just lingering across the southeast. But generally, for a lot of England and Wales, actually, it's going to be quite a pleasant day. Plenty of sunshine, a few showers around. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, really, a day of sunshine and blustery showers, with some of these showers potentially quite heavy and thundery. For most of us, temperatures generally around where they should be for the time of year. But in the south, in the sunshine, feeling quite warm.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Now, there's lots more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be speaking to Britain's former top spy, the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. But before that, here's the news headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
It's 10 o'clock. Good morning to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak is considering a cut to inheritance tax as he looks to entice voters ahead of the general election. The Sunday Times claims the Prime Minister plans to reduce the 40% rate in the budget in March, with a view to phasing it out altogether in future years. Inheritance tax is charged at 40%, but the vast majority of estates fall below that threshold, so married couples can pass on £1 million to their kids without being taxed. Less than 4% of UK deaths result in an inheritance tax charge, and political commentator Peter Spencer says it only benefits the wealthy.
It is a tax cut which is good news for the rich and has no impact on people who are not so well heeled. I mean, what does it mean to people who are renting, for example? What does it mean to people who've got a little place that isn't worth that much? Absolutely zero. Meanwhile, the economy is manifestly strapped for cash, and if you cut that tax, then what? Then how does that impact on, say, cutting income tax, which would be good news for everybody? There isn't that much money to splash, cash to splash around. If you give it to the rich, you can't give it to the others.
Dozens of armed police in London have stepped back from firearms duties after a colleague was charged with murder. 24-year-old Chris Cabba was unarmed when he was shot and killed in South London last year. A Met Police officer appeared in court on Thursday in relation to the fatal shooting. GB News understands as many as 100 counter-terrorism officers, that's the Met's most elite firearms unit, have decided to step away from armed duties. Mental health has dropped off the political radar. That's according to the Deputy Lib Dem leader, Daisy Cooper. She'll unveil proposals for regular checkups on the NHS for those at risk at her party's annual conference in Bournemouth later. Ms Cooper's expected to say so-called blue wall voters are furious that the NHS has been, in her words, trashed by the Tories. Mental health MOT checks would be offered to men in their 40s, a woman who've recently given birth, and people in retirement under party plans. The Home Secretary suggests that international migration rules and treaties aren't fit for purpose in the age of jet travel and smartphones. Suella Braverman's heading to Washington and will urge US counterparts to consider a shake-up to the international conventions and legal frameworks designed more than half a century ago. The Home Secretary has previously stated her personal view that the UK should leave the European Convention on Human Rights, which was signed in 1950, which she's blamed for the failure to implement the Rwanda scheme. This is GB News on TV, in your car, on your digital radio and on smart speaker too. And that's it from me for the moment. Now it's over to Camilla.
Thanks, Aaron. Back to the Camilla Tominey show now. And in just a minute, I'm going to be speaking to former Labour and Liberal Democrat MP Luciana Berger. I'll also be joined by the Liberal Democrats' Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain. And I'll be hearing from Britain's former top spy, the old boss of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. And leading net zero sceptic, the Tory MP Craig Mackinlay, is going to join me in the studio to give me his views on the Prime Minister's net zero U-turn. Well, we're going to be speaking about that subject now to Luciana Berger. She's the former Labour and Liberal Democrat MP for Liverpool Wavertree. Lovely to see you, Luciana. Thanks for coming into the studio. Let's ask you about the net zero climb down, because you were Shadow Energy and Climate Change Minister for 3 years in the previous administration, let's put it that way. What do you think? Because I'm a bit confused by where Starmer stands on this issue. We haven't really heard much pushback from him on some of the climate announcements that have been made by Rishi Sunak in the week. We've got a briefing into the Sunday papers today that says that your former colleague Ed Miliband, who I know you work really close with on some of his own measures, is a liability for the Labour Party, and that people are getting annoyed with him because he might be costing the Labour Party votes because of his quite hawkish stance on the climate. What do you think?
Well, I think Keir Starmer's been pretty busy this week, holding the government to account. You know, we are, I wouldn't say celebrating, we're acknowledging the year anniversary this weekend of what was a shocking period under the leadership of Liz Truss as Prime Minister, and that disastrous budget, which has resulted in impacting on so many people across the country, whether that's the cost they're incurring with increased mortgages, etc. You know, some very, very tricky times. So rightly so, as I think the leader of the Labour Party, we've seen him this week deal and contend with that issue being in the city. We've also seen...
He's also been in France and Montreal.
You know, and I was also say, also, you know, he's on the international stage, and he's, you know, we can't solve the world's problems as a country by ourselves. And I think it's absolutely right that he's been spending time meeting with leaders, both in Montreal. He was with Macron earlier this week. So I think he's been pretty busy.
I know, but at the same time, do we think that he's perhaps not setting out his strong and staunch opposition to what Rishi Sunak is saying, precisely for the point you've just mentioned, that people are facing really tough times economically. You know, the cost of living crisis is still a thing for people. Energy bills have come down, but we're now into the winter season, and if you're anything like me, you've put your thermostat back up because it's been cold. And therefore, he can't position himself against this because he knows it's saving people money.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that. I think that, well, first of all, I think we have heard some very robust proposals from the Labour Party, which are very practical and actually showing what a government can and should be doing to support people with their energy bills. So whether it's the Labour proposal to create GB energy, that we should be creating energy in this country, we should also be harnessing the natural resources that we have. We're an island, we have wind that blows, we've got tidal power that we should be accessing. We've seen that stall even just in the past year. We've seen terrible examples of where we haven't seen any sort of offshore energy projects going ahead. So absolutely, we shouldn't be relying on dictators like Putin to determine what we're paying with our energy bills. I welcome the fact that Labour has set out its plan to have a GB energy, and they've also set out the Warm Homes plan, which would help millions of households.
Although
across
Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, had to say that their Green Prosperity Plan, which is £28 billion a year on green measures, would have to be delayed because there wasn't enough money. And then people said, well, have you really costed any of this? I mean, there's a suggestion that the Climate Change Act that was introduced by Ed Miliband has cost, at a Conservative estimate, about £500 million.
So let's break down all those different elements. I think it's absolutely right that a Shadow Chancellor is being prudent with the economy's finances in the way that we haven't seen from this government. And we are all suffering. I mean, people are now paying on average £220 a year more this year compared to last year on their mortgage costs alone if they're a homeowner. And actually, we have to look at the nation's finances. And Labour doesn't know exactly what it might inherit if they're successful at the general election. But certainly it's right for them to say, our nation's finances are in such dire straits that we need to be responsible. And I think anyone would welcome that because we haven't seen that fiscal and economic responsibility from this government. And certainly, people are really suffering as a result of that. But what Labour has is that it acknowledges and it rightly recognises the opportunities that it would bring. We need to look at what the jobs are for the future in this country, and whether that's investing in our energy infrastructure or ensuring that we have homes that aren't spending, there are millions of households in this country that are spending money on their energy bills, on electricity and gas, because we have such leaky properties. We have some of the most energy inefficient homes in this country. So for the Prime Minister to say that he's going going to delay the energy efficiency targets. What does that mean for the majority of people renting in this country?
But equally, what does it mean for responsible landlords who are saddled with £10,000 to £15,000 bills, which presumably they can only then transfer onto their tenants with higher rents? I mean, has all of this stuff just been rushed too much? Because figures like Ed Miliband have actually become zealots over the climate. You know, they've sort of inherited this kind of Greta Thunberg catastrophe approaching narrative, which is actually not really in sync with the electorate, who is saying we care about the planet, but we don't want to have to pay through the nose to do it. Not least, as David Maddock pointed out, that we only account for 1% of global CO2 emissions.
But people are paying for it. People are paying for it at this moment. They've paid, and they've seen it acutely in the past year, where they've had to pay, you know, upwards of £3,000 for some households on energy bills because their homes are so energy inefficient. And our homes are much less energy efficient compared to many other properties, be that residential homes or commercial properties across Europe. And this is something that the government could have contended with. You rightly point out that I was Shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change back in 2010. I did that role for 3 years. I stood opposite the government that said they were going to do all these things to support homeowners to invest, or landlords. None of that came forward. I wrote countless articles. They're still online. I would welcome anyone, you know, to go and read them. It's all come true, where we've now 13 years down the line, we're not in any better position to help households to be able to insulate their properties, and whether that's homeowners themselves, whether that's people living in rented accommodation or social housing, we've got a massive issue. We have 19 million homes at a starting point that could, you know, that desperately need to be better insulated, and we haven't seen any of that happen. So people are paying today, and they're also paying the higher energy bills because we haven't seen a government invest in our energy security and our energy infrastructure. So we're now having to rely on foreign gas imports. We've got loads of issues which many people, including myself, pointed out 13 years ago, and we are no further down the line.
You're now on here banging the drum for Labour and Labour policies, which is great. Obviously, you've had quite a political journey. You were driven out of the party under Jeremy Corbyn by anti-Semitism. At one point, you had to have a bodyguard. You were receiving appalling anti-Semitic abuse on social media and in other avenues. Keir Starmer's now come in. We had a segue where you went to the Liberal Democrats during the whole Brexit Remain divide. I know you had a child in that time. The independent group that you joined from Labour then ended up being Change UK. You stood as a Lib Dem in 2019, and now you're back as a Labour Party member. Presumably then you have confidence that Starmer has cleaned up Labour's act on this, even though we've got inappropriate language used by Diane Abbott when it comes to writing letters to The Guardian. We've also got Jeremy Corbyn and the spectre of him potentially running for Mayor of London. What's your reaction to that?
Well, firstly, on Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, I've listened very closely to what Sir Keir Starmer has said and the leadership of the Labour Party, and he has made it very clear there is no future, zero future for Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, and he will not be running as a Labour candidate.
Should there be a political future for Jeremy Corbyn at all when you consider the sharing of the anti-Semitic mural, and he denies it, but his tendency towards anti-Semitic tropes, but also supporters who have definitely harboured anti-Semitic views?
Oh, I mean, I'm on record on countless occasions being very clear about my position on Jeremy Corbyn. And I think for me what was most acute was when an independent body in this country, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, carried out an investigation into what happened under his leadership in the Labour Party and found the party to be guilty of breaching the Equality Act, of being perpetrated harassment and intimidation of its Jewish members, and also the fact that under his leadership there was direct political interference in what was going on.
So he shouldn't run for Mayor of London?
Well, let's be very clear, he's not going to be running as a Labour candidate.
No, but should he run at all?
Well,
after these findings?
Well, I mean, there's nothing to stop anyone from running as candidates unless they
but morally,
of course he should
consider his position. There's loads of Jewish people living in London.
Of course he should, but let's be very clear, he's not going to be running on the Labour ticket.
No,
if he runs as a candidate, he will be as an independent candidate, and he'll be running against the Labour Party, and it's been made very clear that he will not be allowed to run as a Labour candidate, a parliamentary candidate, or any other type of Labour candidate at the next general election or any future council election. So I can't control what anyone seeks to do as an independent.
I know, but you wouldn't...
I'd
be very happen.
Absolutely not, and I'd be very outspoken, you know, if that does go ahead. I mean, it remains to be seen.
You don't think he should run, is what I'm trying to get to.
Of course not. I mean, he hasn't either denied or confirmed that he will be running.
I mean, should he have just stepped down from politics altogether with the findings of that report?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very much, very clearly on record as saying how disgraceful it was that in the wake of an extensive inquiry, which we didn't even look at, you know, it looked at a certain number of cases. It didn't look at everything because it wasn't possible to look at everything. But, you know, they took, I think it was, you know, around 100 cases and looked, you know, what happened under his reign. And, you know, the shame of what happened under his watch, under his leadership, which he then, sought to denigrate even further by not accepting the findings of the report, was an absolute disgrace.
We've got about 60 seconds left. A quick word on dangerous dogs, because I know you campaigned heavily on this issue when you were a Labour MP.
Yes.
Do you think that these XL bully dogs now should actually be culled? Those still in existence, because we talked about the ban, but puppies are going to have, 10 to 15 years of life. We've had another man in London bitten so badly that he's gone into hospital. The owner can't be traced, apparently. What should be done, Luciana?
So I did have the very, very serious events happen in my constituency. I saw not one but two of my constituents die because of dangerous dogs, John Paul Massey and Louise Cahill, and as a result of which I worked very closely on this issue to see some changes come forward. So we've now got an increase in sentencing, but it's not enough. Let's be very clear, the majority of dog owners in this country are responsible. They look after their pets. They ensure that they are responsible when they go out and about. But for a very small minority, that is not the case. And we have a duty to protect people when they're going about their business on the streets. We've also got a duty, I think, to protect our postal workers who are the subject of these attacks daily.
Compulsory muzzles, dog licences, culls on XL bullies. What would you advocate?
I was certainly persuaded by the case for dog licences, and we certainly see that very successfully in other countries. I think when it comes to these particular breeds, we have suffered in the past where you kind of identify one breed, and then there's variations of that breed, which means that you then can't hold dog owners to account when their dogs perpetrate attacks on other people. So I think looking at breed alone, we have to look much wider than that. But certainly there's too many examples already, very serious examples where people have lost their lives at the hands of these dogs. And I don't think the measures announced so far are going to be enough to tackle this very serious issue.
Final quick question. Are you going to stand for Labour again at the next general election?
No, I have no plans.
No plans. You've got other things outside of politics, which I know you're doing very well at.
I'm a busy mum of two small children.
But still going to be banging the drum for Labour?
Yeah, I came back into the Labour Party just a few months ago. I'm just a member. I'm not anything else. I come with no official hats on or responsibilities. But no, I see in Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, and the rest of the front bench a team that is absolutely dedicated to making a difference in this country.
Luciana, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Well, in just a minute, I'm going to be quizzing the Liberal Democrats' Chief Whip, Wendy Chamberlain, live from their conference in Bournemouth. Don't go anywhere.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain across the north and the west of the UK today. It will be quite heavy at times, the wind's increasing too. But in any sunshine, it won't feel too bad. But looking at the bigger picture, it generally stays unsettled. Further weather systems pushing through over the next few days, and then very deep area of low pressure moving in for Wednesday. For the rest of Sunday, we do have rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England pushing northwards into Scotland, but brightening up across parts of England and Wales with some glimmers of sunshine from time to time. The wind's coming in from the south, brisk, particularly in the west, but it will help lift temperatures in the sunshine up to around 21, possibly 22 Celsius, feeling a little cooler where the winds are strong and the rain continues. And that pushes north and eastwards as we move through this evening. Gales developing around some western coast for a time. The rain could lead to some localised flooding before this pushes away. And then overnight it generally calms down, particularly across England and Wales with some clear spells. Still some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, and temperatures generally remaining in double figures. So Monday gets off to a bright start across England and Wales. There will be a few showers that come and go through the day. Northern Ireland and Scotland seeing some showers too. Some of these could be heavy at times, but sunny spells in between. And generally winds will be lighter compared to Sunday too. And the wind's still coming in from the south, so really lifting those temperatures 22 or 23 Celsius towards the southeast.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Wendy Chamberlain, the Lib Dem MP for North East Fife and the Liberal Democrat Chief Whip, joins me now from their party conference in Bournemouth. Wendy, thank you for your time, because I know you're busy at conference. I know what it's like. You're here, there and everywhere. Now, we've seen from Ed Davey this morning, he's given an interview to The Observer where he says he's going to smash through the blue wall. So tell me, how many seats are you hoping to win at the next general election, Wendy?
Well, obviously, Ed was pointing to our 4 by-election victories that we've had since 2019. And you may remember Chesham and Amersham, that was the first of our stunts with that blue wall. But I think it's quickly developed as a narrative because it's quite clear that we have the opportunity. There were 80 seats that we were seconds to the Conservatives in 2019. But there's a number of seats now where we believe that we can beat the Conservatives. So, Camilla, I'm not going to put a number on it, but what I would say is we're working really hard. We're realistic about the targets that we're working for. And I think we've got a really credible set of parliamentary candidates who I've been meeting with already this weekend.
Do you think the public are sure of your policies, though, Wendy? It's interesting you mentioned Amersham and Chesham. That's very near my neck of the woods. I live very nearby. And I was a bit confused by the Liberal Democrat campaign, because in the manifesto, you speak about your continued commitment to HS2. And then, lo and behold, when you campaigned in Chesham and Amersham, you were anti-HS2 in your leaflets. So which is it? Are you pro the rail project or anti?
Well, Camilla, you'll maybe remember, given it's so close to you, that Cheryl Gillan, who was the Conservative MP in Chesham Amersham before Sarah Green, despite the fact that the Conservative position then was to support HS2, was opposed to it, and she was opposed to it on the basis of her constituent. And Sarah Green, now the MP in Chesham Amersham, representing our constituents in that way. But in relation to HS2, I think for me, as a Scottish politician, where we need to look at UK-wide infrastructure and improve that, and improve services in the north, which have long been neglected, I think there is still a case for HS2, and I think it's short-sighted of the government to be moving back from those commitments. I think for those in the north, it's a betrayal.
If the Liberal Democrats are in a stronger position come the next general election, be that in the spring or indeed autumn next year, say if you were in some kind of confidence and supply situation with Labour, would you insist that the HS2 project continues?
Look, I'm not going to talk about what comes after the election or confidence supply. In fact, I think Ed Davy's been really clear that there are no facts and deals, and I think you only have to look at in campaign mid-Bedfordshire to understand that. But, as a policy position, we're committed to HS2 because we believe that what has long been neglected is the infrastructure to deliver the productivity and economic benefits that the UK desperately needs. The government has stepped away from levelling up. It's meaningless.
OK, another issue of confusion for me because of what your colleague Layla Moran, who's the Foreign Affairs spokeswoman, said yesterday. We want to rejoin the EU, she told a fringe meeting at conference. Yet at the same time, Ed Davey says you don't. Who's right, Layla Moran or Ed Davey?
So, Camilla, we, as you know, the Liberal Democrats are very interested in policy, and that's what we're debating in the coming days. And we have a 4-point plan in relation to how we rebuild our relationship with Europe. And I think that's the thing that's really key. We didn't vote for Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal. Everybody believes that Brexit is not working, regardless of what your position was before the referendum. So what the Liberal Democrats are focused on is rebuilding that relationship with Europe so that we can then look at other things in the future. But we have to be focused on that in the first instance.
But Wendy, to what extent? I think the quote, "we want to rejoin," is unequivocal from Layla Moran, isn't it?
Well, what I would say is go back to our 4-point plan. We need to rebuild that relationship. This is not, it's easy to use words like rejoin or single market. This is really complicated. Not only have we, and that's what the Conservatives completely failed to appreciate, particularly under Boris Johnson, hence the oven-ready deal. But we're in a position now where not only is our economy suffering as a result of Brexit, but the trust and relationships that we had with our European neighbours have been damaged as well. This is a long-term project.
OK. I also noted that yesterday the Liberal Democrat conference passed a motion insisting that menstruation affects non-binary and trans people. Therefore, the language around women menstruating should be changed to people who menstruate. Are the Lib Dems trying to erase women?
Camilla, that's not quite right. The policy was particularly in relation to period poverty, and I'm sure both you and I will be completely aligned on the need to address that. We know that 1 in 5 women has issues in relation to period poverty, where they can't afford period products, they can't gain access to them, and that's what our policy motion was focused on yesterday.
But what's this phrase, people who menstruate? Isn't that also known as women?
Women and people who are trans. It's a very small proportion of the population. But what I'm saying to you is that policy was about period poverty, and I'm pretty sure you and I can both agree about the need to address that.
I know, but have you removed woman and changed it to people who menstruate? Because why not say women and...
We haven't removed women at all. I mean, I know women and girls struggle with this issue, but I think we also have to make sure that we are inclusive and we make sure that we're considering everybody in our policy making.
Do you know many men who menstruate, though?
Camilla, we're talking about period poverty. I think it was a really strong, powerful, and I really wish you had been there. You should look it back on YouTube to hear the debate, because we were very focused on that challenge. I'm the co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Votes at 16, alongside the Father of the House, Sir Peter Bottomley. So that's
a yes. All right, lovely to have an unequivocal answer at the end, Wendy. Enjoy the rest of conference. Lovely to see you this morning.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Now, Catherine Forster's lapping all that up in Dover with our People's panellists. Catherine, what do they make of the interviews this morning?
You're talking about the Yes, hello Camilla and welcome back to the Tea Cafe in Dover. We've been listening to what the politicians say. I'm going to start first with Ian, and Luciana Berger was talking about dangerous dogs. She said that 2 constituents had been killed by dangerous dogs that, to her knowledge, in her area. We were talking a bit before, because of course you're a dog trainer, you understand dogs very well, about the coming ban and what measures should be taken. They're not going to be culled, they're going to be muzzled. Luciana was also suggesting dog licences. Do you think that would be worthwhile?
Yeah, I think dog licences are a good idea, plus some sort of mandatory training for dog owners. There's plenty of trainers around everywhere, so you could just go for a 2-week course and just know how to get your dog how to behave in a proper manner, and probably have more stricter sentencing on the owners that the dogs that do attack.
That's important, isn't it? And also in the headlines today, front page of the Sunday Times, the government thinking about cutting the inheritance tax threshold and getting rid of it altogether. What do you think about that?
I don't think it should exist. You're taxed on your money to buy a house, you're taxed on the house, and then your children are taxed before they take over your house. So they've got so much more tax out of us already. You can't really, you're taxing tax. It's madness.
Hated by a lot of people, isn't it? So you think it'd definitely be a popular move and a vote winner. Steve, what do you think about a possible getting rid of inheritance tax?
Well, I don't think it's going to affect the people at the bottom of the social structure, because those people won't have anything to give away, or whatever it is won't fall within that bracket anyway if it wasn't. I think it's just a ruse it's a vote for things. We've got an election coming up.
Yes. Yes, I think you may be onto something there. Only about 4% of deaths do result in an inheritance tax charge. And just very quickly on prisons, because we've got lots of things to talk about, but you were Deputy Prison Governor. You worked at Wandsworth for a long time. Were you surprised by the escape? Very quickly, and then anything else that you noticed today?
I was surprised. There's a lot of changes gone on in the prison service, and staffing levels have dropped to what I would say are dangerous levels. But of course, basic security doesn't change, and there should have been some basic checks when that vehicle went in and when that vehicle went out.
Yes, lots of questions to answer as to how that happened. But of course, the prison service has been under a lot of strain, hasn't it, in recent years? And Lorraine, to finish up with you, what did you make of what the politicians had to say? And also, Suella Braverman is going to be talking tough this week about immigration. I think you've got a message for the government, haven't you?
I have. Wendy Chamberlain just said that Brexit hasn't been working. It hasn't worked because we didn't get Brexit. It was never done properly. When are the politicians going to grow a pair and get us out of the European Court of Human Rights?
So there you are, a very clear message from Lorraine in Dover. We expect to be hearing a lot about this from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, who's going to New York this week and making a speech. But for now, from Dover, back to you, Camilla.
Great job, Catherine Forster, and all of our People's panellists. Thank you. You know, politicians have to grow a pair if they appear on this show, because I do grill them. Sometimes they run scared of that. Sometimes we don't get the politicians appearing because they think they might be roughed up a bit. But as I say, I'm fair to both sides in being robust in my questioning. Now, somebody who's also been robust in his questioning in the past is Sir Richard Dearlove, former head of MI6, who joins me now. Sir Richard, lovely to speak to you this Sunday morning. Thanks very much for your time. I mean, this is the week that we've seen 5 Bulgarians arrested for suspected spying on behalf of Russia. We've obviously had the Chinese spying scandal in Parliament. So, Richard, what's your view? Have we got a problem with espionage that might have escalated in recent years?
Well, it may have escalated on the Chinese side, and I think the Chinese probably have become more active over the last decade. On the Russian side, it's a problem that's been there since the end of the Cold War. There hasn't been a break in Russian espionage activity. It's just continued at much the same level. But every now and again, you see a bit more of the iceberg above the water.
Chinese spying story involving a researcher who had been able to get a pass into Parliament. Does that worry you? Does it surprise you? Or has this stuff always happened and perhaps been thwarted by MI6 and others before the public's even got to know about it?
Well, I think there's a lot that you don't learn, and that's not surprising because it's kept secret. It doesn't appear in the public domain. I think the case in Parliament indicates that foreign governments that are hostile to us always take an interest in political activity and try and exercise influence in any way that they can. Not sure exactly the character of this case in Parliament. It is, it's unusual. We haven't had a case quite like that. Bear in mind, you had this lady, Lee, this solicitor in London quite recently, who, when she was identified, saw his influence, did a runner and disappeared overseas. I think we have a similar case probably with this young man.
I thought it was interesting as well when you said about the Cold War, the repositioning of our relationship with China. There's been quite a lot of political debate about this. Have we been too close to the Chinese under Cameron and Osborne? Should we now put some distance between us, as was advocated by Liz Truss? How should we be managing our relationship with China?
With great care is my answer. And I think if you go back, yes, we were rather naive. I mean, I've said this publicly before. I've criticised David Cameron and George Osborne for being far too enthusiastic to get close to China. Now, we have a close relationship, a close economic relationship, but that relationship needs to be conducted with our eyes wide open, realising the downside, the dangers, the difficulties of dealing with China, when, you know, their attitude towards us is not entirely one of cooperation and friendliness. They don't believe in win-win. They believe in we win, you lose.
I was speaking to a defence and security expert in Parliament last week who was talking about the fear of the threat to our cyber and other infrastructure. There's been talk in the past about the vulnerability perhaps of some of the undersea cables which connect us to the rest of the world and are responsible for a lot of our internet and other infrastructure. Is that a key concern, Sir Richard, that I would understand has escalated in recent times because of the technological advances we've all made? It might actually make us more vulnerable.
Well, I think the Russians specifically did develop and have sophisticated means for attacking undersea cables. I think that we've probably had some incidents which aren't necessarily proven. For example, the cable to the Shetland Islands was cut earlier, I think last year. Yeah, it's a problem, it's a vulnerability, and I think it's one that the UK, being an island, is very, very conscious of. And there are measures, I'm sure, being taken to, you know, defend that part of our infrastructure, which is so critical.
What's your analysis of Putin at the moment? I know you've raised concerns in the past about his health. He appeared with Kim Jong-un quite recently. His legs seem to be tapping a lot. What's your assessment of his current state, Sir Richard?
Well, I'm not a clinician. And, you know, anything that we say about that is likely guesswork. But I mean, I do have quite a few medical friends who watch him carefully, and the consensus seems to be that he might have Parkinson's. But I gather that Parkinson's comes in different forms, and it isn't necessarily it's an illness that can be controlled, or it's an illness that can be much, much more serious. I'm not going to, as it were, claim medical knowledge, but I think that there's a fair amount of evidence to indicate there's something wrong with him.
What's your prediction on how his reign at the Kremlin might come to an end? Unseated by somebody on the inside?
Well, I think there are two possibilities. You could have someone within his group sort of depose him, or so that the same people remain. And I think the lead candidate for that would be someone like Nikolai Patrushev, who's head of his Security Council, former head of the internal KGB, known now as the FSB. So that's one possibility. I mean, the other possibility is something much more serious, and as it were, a change of regime. I think a lot really depends now on what happens in Ukraine. I mean, if Ukraine does regain all of its territory so that you have, let's say, a defeat of Russia, I think the implications then are much, much more serious. Maybe the war going badly, but hanging on to some of the territory is a different scenario. I mean, the problem that we have...
I say, what's your prediction for that? Because obviously we've seen the Ukrainians make some gains this weekend in Crimea. They've obviously knocked out a key strategic Russian target. When it comes to reclaiming the territory that they've lost, what likelihood is there of that, do you think, Sir Richard?
I don't think we can yet predict that. The military initiative is definitely with the Ukrainians at the moment. The offensive is going slowly. But when I was in Ukraine earlier this year, they were quite clear that there wouldn't be a magical counteroffensive. There would be a series of punches, a series of initiatives. And I think, you know, their progress on the battlefield now, I think, depends on our determination to support and to continue to arm them. And I mean, for example, the American supply of ATACMS, these longer range missiles, things like that can really tip the balance in their favor. But clearly they're making progress in the south, and they've made some quite optimistic statements recently, and their attack on Sevastopol clearly was strategically significant and an important sort of morale booster. So we have to wait and see what happens over the next few months, and then of course there'll be probably another offensive next spring after a reduction of fighting in the winter.
I was wondering whether there's a fear perhaps that the West is growing a little weary. I note what you're saying about the long-range missiles from the US. We had Boris Johnson writing in The Spectator an edition ago saying we really need to step up our support. And actually there has been this, well, ongoing weariness from the likes of Germany and other European countries. And then Poland and this grain deal, perhaps jeopardising their support for the Ukraine.
Yeah, there are problems. There's a problem with Poland, but I think this is largely related to the forthcoming Polish election, and you know the rural vote for the current government and winning that election. So it's a spat. I don't think it's going to, as it were, undermine ultimately the strategic relationship between Poland and the Ukraine. No. War weariness, yes. I mean, there are problems in Germany. You know, if you look at the sort of polling in relation to Ukraine, there are problems in France, Slovakia. And then, of course, one has the concern of Trump and the possible Trump presidential candidature. These are problems, but...
on that subject, Sir Richard...
I'm not going to predict how it's going to turn out, but so far, so good. We're sustaining our support for the Ukrainians, and that's important.
Quick answer to this one, Sir Richard, if you don't mind. On that subject, who's a bigger threat to Western democracy, Donald Trump or an increasingly bewildered Joe Biden?
I think Trump is probably the worst outcome of the two.
It's a bit of a Hobson's choice, though, isn't it, Sir Richard?
It is indeed, and maybe neither will be presidential candidates.
Thank you very, very much indeed for your time this morning, Sir Richard Dearlove. Now, don't go anywhere because, of course, it's been a big week for Rishi Sunak. On Wednesday, he dumped a number of the government's key climate commitments. After the break, I'm going to be hearing from somebody who possibly thinks the government should have gone even further, the Tory MP, Craig Mackinlay. I'll see you in just a jiffy.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family. GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. As promised, I'm joined by Craig Mackinlay in the studio. He's the Tory MP for South Thanet and chair of the Net Zero Scrutiny Committee. You've scrutinised the government's plans. What do you reckon? Has he climbed down on the climate stuff enough, or does he need to be more?
What I'm very pleased about is I think we've opened the door to a discussion, because we haven't been having a discussion before. A word we've heard a lot of this week is pragmatism.
Yes.
And I think this is a pragmatic approach. And do you know what is really underlying all this? Is that we do not have enough electricity generation.
I thought you were going to say votes.
Well, some of those would be nice as well.
It's politically more expedient for him to abandon some of these pledges, or at least delay them, because you know it's going to win you votes.
Well, at the end of the day, we're here to get elected. We're here to serve the public.
You might also be serving the public better if you try and save the planet.
Well, I don't think that's stopped at all. We've still got the 2050 in place for good or ill.
Yeah.
But
do you not agree with that then?
I'm a bit. Why 2050? Why not 2045? Why not 2055? Yeah. But what I'm concerned about is the rest of the world are really saying yaboo to all this. Yeah. And we seem to be embarking on a potentially £3 trillion enterprise. 3 trillion.
Have you got that calculation?
That's from National Grid. That is the potential up cost of decarbonising the UK.
Yeah.
We need to have that debate. And I need to be absolutely sure that these forecasts and everything else, just think about the OBR. They couldn't even get a forecast right 5 months ahead. Yeah. They were 14% wrong. But suddenly the climate change forecasters have got it absolutely right to 2100. I hope they have. I really hope they have. Because a £3 trillion enterprise has got to be founded on
I suppose the argument
absolutism.
for that will be 3 trillion up until 2050.
It is. It is. But I mean, let me just explain the energy supply. Only 20% of the energy we use is electricity.
Yeah.
The other 80% is petrol, diesel in your tank and gas and oil in your home. We haven't even got to the renewable sources to get to the 20% of electricity we use.
Yeah.
We're actually talking about replacing that 80% with renewable sources or nuclear, I hope. I'm very much in favour of nuclear. And then you've got to have a fair bit in reserve to charge whatever you're going to charge to be the storage mechanism for when the wind doesn't blow. Because typically, and a couple of years ago in Germany, they had a wonderful word. Dunkelflaute is when you have an anti-cyclone sitting above Europe. And the wind hasn't blown in the coldest bit of the winter.
I mean, because we had Luciana Berger on earlier talking about wind power and tidal and we're
it's all lovely, but where are you going to store it? This is the truth that nobody is talking about. You've got a choice of batteries, and I've got real grave concerns about batteries. Do we really want to be entering a Chinese supply chain? So, you know, we're jumping out of Putin's frying pan into President Xi's fire is one. You could do some pumping uphill, so you can use hydropower. But nobody's really talking about what the solution is. I'm worried that we are nudging the population into technologies that are very raw, not really tried. Are batteries in cars the best we can do? If we have that pause, perhaps hydrogen might show itself again, need loads and loads of electric power to make the stuff, or it might be a synthetic fuel.
But even if we're looking at hydrogen and other options, you're going to have to put a shed load of investment into some of those industries, and therefore it's going to cost the taxpayer in the long run, whatever happens. If we're going to be switching ever more greener, which I think we can both agree we should do, don't want to be Luddite about it and go back to the days of the Industrial Revolution, like pollution filling our cities and all the rest of it. What I found interesting about what you wrote for the Mail on Sunday this morning is you're talking about the counterintuitive nature of the drive towards electric cars. You're basically saying, in the headline, they'll need to excavate the streets using diesel diggers. Good point. And then you talk about the electrification plans for lamppost bins and benches as pie in the sky. Why do you say that?
You've got to connect or find an electricity supply to a lamppost, say. A lamppost only uses about 1 kilowatt. It's only got to do a bit of lighting. To actually have a fast charger uses 100 kilowatts. So to get that power to it, you're going to have some substantial cabling, some substantial new substation, and some electricity supply, please.
Yes, where's the electricity coming from?
That is the problem. I mean, my energy plan is that we go for a decade of gas, domestic preferably. So we're not importing LNG from as far away as Australia, which on any CO2 terms is mad, as we finally get back on track for a nuclear future, which was abandoned in 1997 by Tony Blair, and we've only just about talking about it.
Does the Prime Minister listen to you, Craig? Do you go into Downing Street and have these chats?
I've had discussions with many of the senior ministers, I haven't had a one-to-one with the Prime Minister about this, but energy ministers most certainly have. And I think my views on the energy policy were made very clear with the passage of the energy bill.
You must be pleased, because David Maddox was on the paper review earlier saying that he's handing Tories like you some red meat. Are you gobbling it up with glee?
I am. What I'm most pleased about is we're having the debate. For too long, we've not been having this debate about net zero. I mean, it wasn't long ago we were going to ban new cars and internal combustion engine cars at 2040. That was deemed to be the date. Then it shifted back down to 2035. No great reason, I could see. And then Boris Boosterism, we loved him dearly, it went to 2030.
Well, talking of Boris, I mean, a lot of these ideas were his ideas and you backed him.
I did. I didn't back him on the energy stuff. Not at all. Not at all. And he knew I was not on that page with him.
OK.
I mean, the worst thing I think we ever had was having the saddle of COP26, because whoever's in the saddle tends to have to, over-egg it.
Produce ever more great announcements to keep the likes of Greta.
Well, what we can talk, we're now on a reality check, I think, and that's important.
All right, let's have a reality check on a couple more domestic issues, if you don't mind. Let's whiz through some of these. May election or autumn election? What's your prediction?
I'm still on autumn.
Are you?
Yeah, I am still on autumn.
You're happy about
But it might be May.
Can you keep your seat, Craig?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I can keep my seat. Yes, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
On the doorstep. I mean, they're disaffected with the Tories, to say
they are.
At least.
They are. We've got different seats around the country. We've got what we call the blue wall, red wall. I call mine the sea wall. And I think the opportunity for creating some proper divisions between us and Labour, and I think energy is one of them. I think some tax policy is another one.
OK.
If we can solve boats, then I think it's in hand.
If you can solve boats, good Lord. I mean, we all live in hope. We'll get onto that in a minute. Inheritance tax, should it be scrapped?
It's the easiest thing would be to scrap it.
But it's a policy that allows the wealthy to be wealthier.
The wealthy have the ability to get through the loopholes, get some expensive advice, some planning techniques to actually avoid most of it. It's those that are in the middle and plus that are paying this. What would be a very easy step forward would be to raise the level massively to get rid of the fiscal drag that we've had for the last 14 years when the levels have not been changed at all. Many ways of skinning this cat. It's a complex tax. It doesn't raise that much money, but it concerns
but it's
me.
Like totemic, isn't it? It's like...
Well, it concerns me that, you know, if you've got a house in Surrey, it's no grand house, you could be in the IHT web, and I don't think that was ever intended.
OK. Should migrants be housed in hotels of 3 stars or above?
No.
Why not?
Because I think it's one of the pull factors, and this is a domestic pull factor, one of those that we can bear down on.
Yeah.
Where do we put them? That's the big issue. Do we go up the route of old RF bases? That causes grave concern. Maybe Stockholm barges and all the rest of it. Surely, better, we try and beg.
1-star hotels, all right?
Beg with France and say, they're all coming off your beach, can you please stop them?
I know, but 1 star's all right for a migrant?
Well, of course, if it's up to a standard for habitation, why not?
Should we ban smoking?
No.
Why not?
I think
kills people.
Smoking is dying of its own accord, as it were. There are the whole vaping revolution got downsides with youngsters, obviously, and there's big discussions about that. They know the mango flavours and what have you. But I think that alone has actually diminished the amount of smoking.
This is a Sunak idea. What is he using?
Well, I don't know how far. It's only been raised as an issue.
It's not libertarian, is it?
No. Well, I'm a libertarian conservative. You can go to heaven or hell in a handcart of your own choosing.
OK, fair enough. And Susan Hall, the Conservatives candidate for Mayor of London, she's got no speech at conference, and Rishi Sunak has never tweeted anything about her or for her. That's wrong, isn't it? Is this woman being allowed to just sort of like, you know, flap around in the wind and not have any help to beat Sadiq Khan?
Well, I would have thought on the back of the ULEZ vote, effectively in South Ruislip and Uxbridge just a few weeks ago, there are no votes in clobbering the motorist. Susan Hall very much on side with that plan to actually get rid of that ULEZ charge. I think because of the effect on Outer London, she's in with a shout, and so she should be supported. I like what she says because she's no nonsense.
She's a straight-talking righty, a bit like you, Craig.
She is.
Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very, very much for coming in from South Thanet. Well, that's enough from me today. You'll be seeing me again next week at 9:30. Up next, it's Arlene Foster, so don't go anywhere for that, and have a great weekend.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We've got rain across the north and the west of the UK today. It will be quite heavy at times, the wind's increasing too. But in any sunshine, it won't feel too bad. But looking at the bigger picture, it generally stays unsettled. Further weather systems pushing through over the next few days, and then very deep area of low pressure moving in for Wednesday. For the rest of Sunday, we do have rain across parts of Northern Ireland, Northern England pushing northwards into Scotland, but brightening up across parts of England and Wales with some glimmers of sunshine from time to time. The wind's coming in from the south, brisk, particularly in the west, but it will help lift temperatures in the sunshine up to around 21, possibly 22 Celsius, feeling a little cooler where the winds are strong and the rain continues. And that pushes north and eastwards as we move through this evening. Gales developing around some western coast for a time. The rain could lead to some localised flooding before this pushes away. And then overnight it generally calms down, particularly across England and Wales with some clear spells. Still some showers across Northern Ireland and Scotland, and temperatures generally remaining in double figures. So Monday gets off to a bright start.